Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, believing that everyone deserves to be cared for and to live well. Through community investments, partnerships, and education, Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield is working to address health inequities. More at excellusbcbs.com. And Oasis Rochester, serving older adults by fostering lifelong learning and social engagement through educational classes in areas including arts and humanities, history, and health. Registration online at rochester.oasisnet.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, our connection this hour will be made on June 17th when Rochester City Council votes on a 25-26 Rochester City School District budget. And according to reporting from WXXI's Noel Evans, the district is facing another budget season with a shortfall. The gap, as Evans reports, is expected to be nearly 3 times higher than a year ago. Part of the reason for the shortfall is due to ARPA funding ending. And then pandemic relief dollars have expired. RCSD Interim Superintendent Demario Strickland told Noel Evans that staff pay increases are also to blame. He said compensation is rising 3 to 4%. The projected gap is $38 million. School board members have different opinions about the proposed budget and what to prioritize. We hope to talk to them about this in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, what do parents and child advocacy experts think about all this? Well, the Children's Agenda is helping to answer that question. The nonprofit is going to host an event this evening where attendees can discuss their priorities for what Rochester as a school district spends, how it prioritizes its budget. It's in advance of tomorrow's traditional budget hearing hosted by the district. This hour, we preview the Children's Agenda event, and we welcome your ideas about this, too. Let me welcome to the studio Eamon Scanlon, who's Director of Community Impact at the Children's Agenda. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here, Eamon.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Next to Eamon is Angela Colon-Rentas, who is a credentialed peer advocate, a senior youth and young adult peer service navigator for BIPOC Peak. She's an artist and a member of the Very Invested Parents Group at the Children's Agenda. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And Isabel Rosa is with us, a parent of 2 RCSD students, as is Angela. Isabel is a community and parent advocacy coordinator at the Children's Agenda. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you for having us.
And I want to mention the event tonight is 6:30, Eamon Scanlon, on Zoom.
Yes, 6:30 on Zoom. And if you go to our website, thechildrensagenda.org, you can register right there and get the link.
And so they're not going to require you to try to read through every page of a proposed budget. That's Eamon's job. But but let me start with this. What's the headline as we look at a very big set of questions and priorities for the district? What stands out to you as the most important headline here?
I think the most important headline, like you teased in the opening, was that ARPA is over, so we don't have those additional federal dollars, and they're not coming back. That was really a one-time thing. But we do have a ton of additional state dollars. We have full foundation aid funding. So even though there was a gap that had to be addressed, and the district is addressing that through its savings account, through its fund balance, there's a lot of continuity in this budget. And we just want to make sure that some of the good things that the district are doing continue. And we'll talk a little bit more about them. But I think there's nothing alarming. There's no huge changes in the budget. And in some ways, that's a good thing.
And I want to say as well, as we talk about the various aspects of this budget or a proposed budget, different issues that the district has to cover, I know that there's a lot of people hurting in this community and members of the community really struggling after the death of a student at SOTA. And in respect to that student's family, we're not going to be talking about that tragedy directly. We're going to talk about broader themes related to mental health care and what the district's budget can do to support it. We have tried to report on that issue directly but sensitively and appropriately, and I invite listeners to check out WXXInews.org and see some of the coverage there. But this is not an hour about that particular subject. That is in the backdrop, and I know it's on people's minds, but mental health is a big part of what's on people's mind, and how it's funded, whether it's funded appropriately, whether it's addressed appropriately. How close to hitting the mark are we with that, Eamon, in your view, and how are we doing with that?
I would say the district is doing a great job, and it's important to back up and say it's not entirely the school district's responsibility to tackle mental health. This is a much broader issue that the whole community needs to be working on, and the state. But the school plays a unique role because it cuts down barriers to access because a child can visit right there if you have clinical care on site. And you spend a lot of time at school. There are trusted adults there that you can form those relationships with. And of course, there's a lot of ways that just being at school can impact your mental health in a negative way. So getting ahead of that as well. But in the broader scheme, there are a ton of additional supports being scaled up through school-based mental health clinics. So that puts healthcare providers of mental health right in the schools. And it's a relatively affordable and easy thing to do that can become sustainable through the billing of insurance. And there's existing support through the school-based health centers that also have to have therapists on site. And a third pillar to this is telehealth, which isn't really being utilized as much for mental health supports, but they're exploring ways to do that within the district, and that's even easier to scale to all buildings. So there's a number of ways to come at this. And then there's just the school climate work that's been going on. There are other extracurricular supports that are being added, and we want to put a focus on that because that's usually the first thing to be cut. But there are all these other ways that you can engage kids, and the district is doing a good job, but there's always a worry because of budget cuts that those things are the first to be on the table.
And I think it's really hard to measure how we're doing with mental health. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that kids or families might be struggling, from issues like clinical depression to some really significant trauma and challenges of life, going back, yes, to the pandemic, but not only the pandemic. And so there are questions about, do we have enough staffing and counseling support and support on campus? There are questions about approach during the school day. I mean, you see Governor Hochul is now following the footsteps of a number of other governors across the state, Republican and Democrat, in which she wants to eliminate mobile phone access bell to bell. Not only no screens or cell phones in the classroom, but not in your locker. Just not having it in school at all. And she points directly to mental health with that. I mean, are those the kinds of interventions you want to see, or do you think that that's a little far afield?
It's not far afield. And again, mental health it can be affected in so many ways, and you can support and ameliorate those problems in so many ways. So it shouldn't be an either or. It's a both and. And we are supportive of some form of restriction on cell phone use, but we also want to be sensitive to parent and student need, and not have that fuel something that we're also going to talk about today, which is the crisis of exclusionary discipline. So if you're going to solve one problem, let's not create another by kicking a bunch of kids out of school for using cell phones.
So before we get to discipline, and I think Eamon's right. I mean, all of this ties together. We will have a separate conversation on this program about the governor's proposal, about the bell-to-bell ban of cell phones, about looking at what other states are doing. And I do want to try when we eventually have that conversation to really understand people on all sides. Because I know there are parents who feel pretty strongly that I need to get a hold of my kid in emergency. I need them to be able to get a hold of me in emergency. I don't want a bell-to-bell ban on cell phones. I know there's other parents who feel very strongly that would be a good idea. There's probably teachers on both sides. So listeners, if you've got strong feelings on that, send us a note at connections@wxxi.org. Connections@wxxi.org. We're trying to build a fair and thoughtful discussion for a future conversation on that. Let me ask Eamon's co-panelists a little bit about how they've gotten more involved with the work in the district, and then we're going to kind of go a little deeper on some of these issues that Eamon's been talking about. And Isabel, let me start with you. Your kids are 12 and 17.
Yes.
And RCSD students. When did you decide that you wanted to be working with the Children's Agenda and doing this kind of advocacy work?
A couple years ago, pretty much, I've been doing advocacy and organizing for quite some time, and I really wanted to narrow it down to children and young people. So it's been a few years that I decided to get involved. And then, of course, once I got involved, the level of involvement became more. So like I was really able to speak to school board members, speak to community, share some of my own lived experiences with challenges and even solutions for my children in the district. And I also have a 29-year-old son who's a graduate of the district, and he also graduated from Brockport. So we have a little bit more experience with the district, a little longer experience.
How have your kids done there? How are your 12 and 17-year-olds doing there now?
It's a little different. It is a little different from when the 29-year-old was in school, I can say.
In what way?
I think the world is a little more chaotic, and I find myself talking more to my children about issues that they see on TV or hear, and also intervening, right? We were just having the conversation about cell phones. You know, as a parent, I have to know when to intervene and when to be a mom and be a parent, and kind of have that healthy conversation with them about all and everything that's going on. And plus, it's two. The 29-year-old, there was just the one. So maybe that might be a reason why it feels a little overwhelming.
How do you feel about cell phones in schools?
You know, I don't think they should be banned, but I do think there should be a level of control. And, you know, I'm from the generation also where, you know, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't really communicate with mom and dad for hours and hours until they got home from work. So I understand. And I also, as a parent, I think it's important. We're in school to concentrate on education. We're in school to concentrate on healthiness and learning. And sometimes cell phones can be they can definitely be disruptive.
Do your kids, I don't want to pull, I'm just more curious to know what the kinds of conversations you have. Do you have conversations about mental health, about how kids are doing, how their peers are doing, about what resources are there?
Yes. I need to start having more conversations about resources. I always try to approach conversations with kind of a solutionary type of, and a healthy type of conversation. It has been challenging, and you're right. I don't remember having these conversations with the older one versus the younger one. And the reasons the younger ones bring it up is because they actually have friends who've identified like having, maybe depression or anxiety. And so they come home with questions about that. Not like really technical questions, but it's on their mind and they want to know. And as a parent, we need to have those conversations.
So since you've gotten involved, what is at the top of your list for what you think the district needs to focus on more of or do a better job of or maybe prioritize with its budgeting?
For me, there's a few things, but one of them would be school climate. As the mother of two young men in the district, I would like to know that my child is embraced and understood. And so we do try to advocate. I do advocate on behalf of my children when needed, when I don't feel that they're embraced or understood. Discipline needs to change.
But can you tell me a little bit more when you say you're concerned that at times your kids may be misunderstood in school? What do you mean by that?
Well, they're two young men, and young men's brain development could be all over the place, and they could make silly decisions and do silly things, and at the same time they're growing. So we need to make sure we're planting the right seeds. I need to make sure that he is surrounded by adults. They are surrounded by adults that understand this. And so that's what I mean. Okay.
And then is that also related to how discipline or reaction may be to certain behaviors?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I truly believe, and I think it's safe to say we believe as parents here at the Children's Agenda, that suspensions are outdated. They just don't work. They interfere with learning.
The notion of suspending students at all, you think, is outdated?
Yes. Okay. There's certainly other solutions to disciplining our children. I think if it's really severe, then that's a whole conversation that needs to be had.
Violence, for example.
Yeah, violence and certain violence. Again, I have boys, and one day we were going to school, and we were waiting for the bell to ring, and the two brothers decided to have a little rumble right before the bell rang.
They're wrestling.
They were wrestling. They were doing the whole spectacle, and literally right before the bell rang, and there was parents around, and there was a couple teachers around, and the bell rang, and the door opened, and all the kids ran in, and my two boys just kind of got up and they dusted each other off and themselves, and they looked at me and I looked at them, and they went in. I looked at the parents, I looked at the teachers, and we kind of just knew, okay, let's continue on with the day. Now, that might be a bad example, but I wanted to share that because that's not violence to a degree where, they should be suspended. Certainly maybe brought to their attention, have a conversation with them, maybe, take away something that's extra for them, a privilege for them in school, but certainly not suspension.
Okay, we're going to talk in a moment more with Eamon Scanlon as well about what some of the data says about suspension and about more of what the Children's Agenda is working toward. Let me bring in Angela to the conversation. Angela Colon-Rentas is a parent of a 5 and a 2-year-old. And Angela is a credentialed peer advocate, senior youth and young adult peer service navigator for BIPOC Peak, an artist, and a member of the Very Invested Parents Group at the Children's Agenda. When did you get involved? Why did you get involved with this?
Well, I got involved technically, officially, this year, but I did visit last year a few times when they were coming up with the priorities of the budget. And I had a lot going on at that time, so I decided to take a step back and come in when I'm fully committed. So, at the beginning of this year, it was on my mind, and I did, and I am actually grateful and honored to be part of this group as a very invested parent.
You got a 5 and a 2-year-old. You're going to have a lot going on for a long time.
I do now.
You do, and here you are doing this kind of work. And what's at the top of your list of what you want to see the district doing?
Well, there's a few things, but I would say the first thing is resources. I believe that the Rochester City School District is a pinpoint for all parents because it is mandatory to have our youth in school. So having the availability and accessibility to resources. So if it doesn't matter if the resources are not always educational in some sense, because I know school is a place to learn, but having the resources for mental health, wraparound services, even like opportunities for community-based programming. So having that space and that opportunity to, have, go to the school or even call someone that's going to answer and have resources, say I need help, but in a matter that you're not being stigmatized or it's shameful.
Do you think the district is amenable to these ideas? Are you comfortable that the district is listening to parents?
I believe they listen to some certain extent. I would say that we are in an emergency right now. So having them listening to the parents who go through the situations, who have the barriers, like this is what we need, this is what we're looking for. We're screaming to you, this is what we want. It should be, that they should listen to us.
Okay. And do you now feel like your involvement can make a difference? I mean, part of what we've talked to the Children's Agenda and other groups that do parent advocacy about for years is this idea that parents feel like the district is a million miles away and I'm not going to have a voice here. Do you feel like you have a voice?
Absolutely. Well, as a peer professional, I've been advocating on a state level already, so I understand and the importance of advocacy when it comes down to raising your voice for the voiceless. So when it came down to advocating? Yes, advocating. Sorry, my Spanish. So when it came down to advocating for our children, I was like, it's time. Like my daughter is a kindergartner now. Like I want to know what's going on in the city school district. I want to be able to use my expertise and my strength to the best ability to actually ensure that the future of all of our students are in good hands, and that I could leave and say, I feel that my daughter's going to be safe in a safe school and a safe community.
Do you feel right now
No.
your daughter's in a safe school? No.
In the school, I would say, she's a kindergarten. They're small. They're
Okay.
wraparound services in some
Sure.
sense. But I believe that there's no support. There could be more support for all our children.
So you're concerned about when she gets older.
Yes.
Okay. I should ask, by the way, I should ask Isabel that same question. Generally, do you think your kids are safe at school?
I do, but I think they could be safer.
Okay. And that debate, by the way, about what to do about that. We have board members who've been on this program on very different perspectives here. I don't want to, Eamon's nodding. I mean, you've heard it, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to speak for any board members if I would even slightly misrepresent a position. But I will say generally, there's at least one, maybe multiple members of the board who feel like what you're describing with your boys. They're wrestling before class. You understand they're kind of roughhousing. Their boys are kind of getting it out. They're not trying to hurt anybody. Suspension is not a good idea here. People have expressed on this program in recent years, we need to go the other way. We need to say we're going to be no tolerance to any kind of violence, any kind of hands on kids. And that is what will clean up schools. That's what's going to make parents feel safer to send kids. That's what's going to make students be able to learn better in class. What would you say to that, Isabel?
I think that's a perfectly fine way to feel. I just don't think that suspensions are the solutions. I think that if there is something like violence or, behaviors, there needs to be creative ways and creative solutions, restorative practices, relationship building, meetings with parents and supportive adults. I certainly think that there should be some type of consequence to behaviors if they're not appropriate. But I don't think it should be suspensions.
Okay. And, Angela, your kids are younger, but how do you feel about that?
What the no hands-on
I mean,
tolerance?
yeah, like the no tolerance idea toward anything that's physical.
I don't know. I would say like I have to think about it in some sense. Physical means receiving a hug, so it's not always violence. I would say like if someone needs to be embraced or hugged, I guess if it's playing around in the school, like in the middle of the classroom or anything like that, then no, it shouldn't be tolerated in the classrooms. But if they're moving from class to class, like they could have a little fun in between because it's stressful. You just got out of class where you're overwhelmed and all that stuff. You just need a little with your friends if they feel okay with it, because the other person must be respected as well. So it's like I don't have a clear answer for that.
I'm looking at a set of charts here. And Eamon Scanlon from the Children's Agenda. Let me ask you some general questions, and then let's talk about data. Generally speaking, is it the Children's Agenda's position that suspension as a tool has been used in a racist fashion, in discriminatory fashion?
Yes, and I wouldn't say it's an opinion. I think that there are studies to back that up. It's a national phenomenon, and it's a consistent in the data. So we can dig into the numbers, but you'll see students of different races suspended more harshly for the same behavior. So it's not just, and I think the other side of this would think, oh, well, those kids just act out more, and that's why they're getting suspended more. But we have evidence that this is because there is different perceptions of activity that is seen as more aggressive, and there's just bias towards certain populations of students.
So looking at some of what the Children's Agenda has compiled here, the Rochester City School District has one of the highest suspension rates in New York State, 17% overall, but it breaks down in different ways here. 22.5% of black students were suspended in what looks to me like the latest full year of data, 22-23, Eamon?
Well, we do have update, and I should have given you for
Okay.
the last report, but it hasn't changed much, and so I think it's fine.
So
to
there's
go
still
off
a
of that.
disparity. So here's the disparity. 22.5% of black students suspended in a school year, 9% of white students. 21.7% of students with a disability were suspended at least once in a school year. 16% of the general population or general education students. So those numbers on their own. I want to stress a point that I heard you make sure that I heard it correctly. Your argument is when you've got students who've committed the same quote unquote offense or same action, the white student tends to be treated more leniently. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And you'll see this, it's different across different communities. Some of the biggest bias is often in the suburbs. And I want to, not just make this about the district, but you'll see 5-to-1 or 6-to-1 proportional suspensions for black to white students, right? Like that is not a behavior issue. That's a bias issue. And we see this consistent across all districts, across the country. And there are studies to show that there are behaviors that are the same, but then the consequences are more harsh. And it can be the biases of the people doing it, the perceptions. And with kids with disabilities, there are often issues that may be a consequence of the child's disability or their needs. And when those are not being met or those are not well understood, that behavior can lead to suspensions when it should lead to specific supports for their disability.
In this proposed budget, the school district says that 100% of schools will implement restorative practices with fidelity, that the district will reduce the percentage of overall out-of-school suspensions by about half to less than 8.5%. The district will reduce the current chronic absenteeism rate by 25%, and at least 75% of district students will participate in annual student surveys. What do you make of those ideas?
I think those are good priorities. I think I'd like to see mental health be a little bit higher up in terms of what they're focusing on, but I do think that they are focused, and there is a lot of great work happening on school climate, and it's unfortunate that we haven't seen a bigger dent in the numbers. After COVID, the numbers exploded and they were very high, and particularly long-term suspensions got really out of control in the district. Those are coming down, but we are basically still a little bit above, based on the most recent data, pre-pandemic levels of suspension. So we're not really solving the problem. We're just kind of managing it, and it's going to take a more aggressive approach. It's going to take more buy-in. And when I say aggressive approach, I mean aggressive approach to the alternatives, right? Not the sort of zero tolerance policy, but really assuring there's accountability and buy-in at the school level and the principal level, because you can design a great program, but if we don't win the hearts and minds of the people implementing these things, they just don't really change. And we have to really make this a central piece of education, because it's not just an added program. You cannot push out thousands of kids every year. It's not going to work. You're not going to get the graduation rates, the academics that you want if you keep doing that.
So your recommendations, I'm going to read 5 of them if we could and talk about those here. 14 rock restorative coaches. Every school has at least one help zone. Middle schools will have 2 help zones. Edison Tech High School would have 4 help zones. Other high schools would have 2 help zones. What is a help zone?
So a help zone is just an alternative to suspension room. It's like a branded name for one of those that the Center for Youth runs. And it's a place where, rather than saying you would go to in-school suspension, right, and you just sort of sit there, maybe you get some work, maybe you don't. Help zone is like you talk to somebody about what happened, you cool down, you sort of regulate and understand the behavior, and then you should be, once that's all taken care of, be able to go back to class. So it's about addressing what's going on with the student versus just sort of warehousing them until some predetermined time they're allowed to come back.
Who staffs the help zone?
So that would be, usually it's like sort of a paraprofessional or somebody through the Center for Youth that they hire that's trained to do that. And it, the quality can vary, but it would be somebody that has the specific training to have an approach that's not just I'm bringing in a kid and then I'm kicking him out. Like I am going to have them recognize the behavior, understand any solutions that we can have going forward.
I mean, it's been some time since I was in school, but I do remember the idea of in-school suspension rooms just being these nothing happening. I mean, Angela, you're smiling over there, like just sitting there. No one's getting any instruction. It's just the day is passing.
Yeah.
Nothing is being addressed. And so part of what I understand the help zone is a way of saying what actually happened and what can we do about that, so we can get you back on the road to education. sooner, right? I mean, I understand why you had a pretty strong reaction to thinking back to those suspension rooms. Not a fan?
Well, I never went to one of them myself, but I
Me
remember
neither,
going,
Angela. But.
seeing them. They seem so bleak and so sad and so just. They will fall asleep all day, with their head on the desk
Yeah.
and nothing happens.
That's my
and,
recollection.
And the staff would be sitting there doing what they were doing.
Yeah, that's my recollection too. And I don't know what is gained from that. I mean, I don't know why that is suitable. But let me try this in a different angle here too. I'll probably get an email from a teacher, a retired teacher, who will say, okay, but that help zone exists, and we're going to try to actively work with kids who've been in school suspended or might have been suspended. Now they're going to the help zone. What if it does get physical? Can they handle it? Is there staff to handle it? What do you think, Eamon?
Yeah, I don't think the staffing is that different between an ISS room and a help zone. It's the training of the staff.
Yes.
So, it's just one person in a room usually versus a different person in a room.
Okay.
But it's about what is that, again, like we were talking about how the rooms can look really bleak. Why does it have to be this bleak prison-like atmosphere? Why can't it be a place that's calming, a place where a student could, punch a bag if they needed to get some of that aggression or energy out, or bounce on if younger kids, I've seen calm down rooms where they bounce on a small trampoline, or because sometimes kids are just agitated because they have a lot of energy, because they're dealing with something at home, because they're just hungry or they need some need met. So rather than figuring that out and getting the kids in a good headspace, you just have this bleak room where you're supposed to sit and not say anything and not do anything.
Angela, what do you make of this proposal?
The restorative. I would say that this is a great opportunity to bring in peer professionals, credentialed peer advocates, youth peer advocates, family peer advocates. They're trained, trauma-informed, trained, and culturally responsible. So in that sense, it has a person who could, understand in some sense what are you going through, and they're trained in order to bring you down, regulate you, motivational interviewing, and just give you a time to just be you, give you some guidance, because we're not trying to fix anyone, but some guidance on how to move forward, and having that space rather than just being there all day, give it an hour of actual communication and regulation, then I would believe that would be a much better idea than what we have now.
Someone like you, a credentialed peer advocate.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And this is the kind of work that you feel like you can make a difference with kids on.
Yes, and I know we can. We come from the same community, and we've been in the same similar situations, I would say, and we have that training when it comes down to being culturally informed, and we understand ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. So having that training, we need people who are trained to be unbiased and to support rather than try to fix. In some sense, because when we're being looked at like we need some fixing, then we automatically shut down in some sense. At least me. So if you come with me with an open-ended question, with an open arm and understanding demeanor or voice, tone, where I am not being the culprit, in that sense of looking at it like, why are you this way? More of what happened. How can I support?
Isabel, how does this proposal hit you? What do you think?
I agree. I agree with Angela. I agree with Eamon. It could also be a space where you get, even the opposite, nourishment for the children, love, support in a way where we all assume you get from home and maybe you don't. I love on my boys all day long. I hug them. And they know that. But not all children get that. Mm-hmm. So maybe if they go to a room, maybe they're acting out and behaving certain ways because they're lacking that. So I think what Eamon said and what Angela said were great. And I think it, would also be a space where you could find out, okay, this child just needs someone to talk to, maybe a hug, maybe a healthy conversation, maybe some encouragement.
Well, after we take our only break, I want to come back and ask Eamon a little bit more about some of the things that we mentioned off the top here, which is that this is a district, the Rochester City School District, as it prepares its next budget, that has a bigger shortfall, bigger gap than it has in recent years, $38 million. And some of the comments from the interim superintendent indicate, there's multiple reasons for that, but I don't know if that's any foreshadowing about what the district can or can't do about some of these matters. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And I just want to remind you that there's an event tonight that the Children's Agenda would be happy to have you be part of. It starts at 6:30 and it's on Zoom. So, you can attend from wherever you like. You can hear about the proposed RCSD budget for the upcoming school year. You can share ideas that you have, and we'll post a link to register on the episode page on our show notes here if you want to check it out. That's at 6:30 tonight via Zoom. We're coming right back with them next.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. So as the Rochester City School District prepares its next budget, I want to say again that my colleague Noelle Evans from WXXI News has been reporting on this. And the interim superintendent, Demario Strickland, for RCSD told WXXI, told Noelle Evans that staff pay increases are partially to blame, compensation's up 3 to 4%. There's a shortfall due to ARPA funding ending. All told, we end up with a $38 million gap. And in some of my experience indicates, Eamon Scanlon, that when government is telling you that they've got a gap, they're warning you, don't ask for too much here. Things are already tight. But there's some nuance here. What do you want people to understand about that number?
Yeah, well, and to your point, I want to encourage anybody who talks to government. Yes, they will always tell you, "Oh, it's a tough year." It's always a tough year, apparently, and there is some reality to that, of course. But in the scope of all the years I've covered the RCSD budget, this number, it's not great, but it's smaller than kind of the pre-COVID numbers that I've used to see. We used to have like $60, $70 million gaps, and that was with a much smaller, well, not a much, but a smaller budget, right? The budget's increased. So the percentage on the margins of this is less consequential than it used to be. And there are things that can happen to address this, because those numbers are if nothing changed, and things are changing. Enrollment's going down, positions are shifting, programs are ending. There's already the likelihood a school will close because of declining enrollment, and that's really the reason for most of these budget gaps. It is the increase in costs that is real, but it is also the fact that the students, the population is shrinking. And so there's less money attached to less kids.
So some of the proposals, some of your ideas you think are doable. You can fund 15 rock restorative coaches, budget $5 million to contract with outside agencies to provide additional professional development and trainings for students and parents on the subject of restorative practices. You think that's doable?
Yeah, and it's essentially very close to the numbers that the district has now. So a lot of this is, and I want to give the district credit, we've advocated on these issues for a number of years. They've scaled up based on our recommendations, and we want to continue that, and we don't want to see clawbacks. So this isn't a huge jump from where they are now. It's kind of a small increase, and also just continuing that support. And they totally can do it. It's totally within their realm. And I'd also like to point out the district has a huge amount of reserves of savings right now. And that's not money you want to pull from every year, but it is something that you can use when you're transitioning and you're trying to figure some things out. It's not like a few years ago, the big scandal back in 2020. They have hundreds of millions of dollars they're sitting on. And so there's a little bit of flexibility around the edges around the things you want to support.
Let me get a couple of comments from listeners. Tom says, Evan, you talked about suspension data. What is the data that shows restorative practices works? Eamon, is there good data on restorative practices?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a big comprehensive review and study of restorative practices to show the improvements that it does in reducing suspensions, in improving relationships and school climate. I will say that the one research gap, or I wouldn't say gap, but the thing that we don't see is the closing of those disparities. So when it comes to kids being suspended, it's very hard to address the internal and the structural biases that affect kids. But a way to get around that is simply to put restrictions on suspensions, right? It's very hard to stop people from being biased, but we can stop them from using biased tools. And that's why making suspension a last resort is one of the best policy options.
By the way, before I get our next email, do you get the sense, Eamon, that 10 years ago, the reaction from principals, school administrations would be different to what you just said than it is now? In other words, are more administrations buying into the idea that we don't have to suspend as much?
That's a great question. I think there are more folks that are bought in, but we have gone through so much external events that have upended school life that I think that there was a time, even a few years ago, that this was getting more attention, and now we keep shifting. Like, we're talking about cell phones, we're talking about other things, and there's a little bit of an exhaustion factor, I think, almost, and we have to reacquaint and remind ourselves, oh no, this problem didn't go away. There are still hundreds of thousands of kids being suspended in New York every year, and we're not legislatively or locally through our policies doing the things to address it. So this is a problem that I think there's a lot of support, but we don't have enough action.
Jillian writes in to say, you mentioned foundation aid. What is that?
Yeah.
Eamon?
That's a great. I'm always like, should I even say the name? Right?
Well,
I know, but it is the name. So that's just state aid for schools. That is the biggest pot. There are other pots, but it's a huge amount of money that billions of dollars given out to schools based on their enrollment, based on their student need, and it's supposed to make up for the fact that if you live in downtown Rochester versus Pittsford in the Village, there's huge differences in property wealth and in student need. And so the state is trying to step in and not equalize, but create some equity in the system so that there's enough money for schools to meet the needs of students. Because the needs are much higher in Rochester than in some of our outside suburbs, but there's a lot less wealth within the community to draw from. And it's not reasonable to have ridiculous taxes to do that. So that's a way of creating equity in education.
Is that system still? Is it fixed, Eamon?
It's not. I'll say this: it's better than it's ever been,
Okay.
but it's not where it needs to be. It's a fully funded formula, but there's a big debate right now about tweaking and changing the formula to make it even more equitable. And this is the second year we've had full funding, so it's with ARPA and everything else. It's hard to know if this is the right formula, if this is the right mix. People fought for decades to get to this point, and now we have to kind of readdress of like, did we do it right?
Tim writes in to say that both of the parents on your panel have talked about safety being a big issue for their children. Armed officers in every school would make sure that we see a lot less violence. That is from Tim.
We had armed officers in schools a number of years ago, and I'll let the other folks jump in too, but I just want to say there were police in the school district, and suspension rates were higher than they are now. It doesn't necessarily fix anything, and actually we had incident reports of kids getting pepper sprayed, being handcuffed, because when you put those tools, when you put guns and handcuffs and pepper spray in schools, things get used and kids get exposed to violence and a negative atmosphere. So I would say that's not a solution, but I'll defer. Sorry, I had to jump in.
Okay, so let me ask the parents on the panel who've joined us here. Isabel Rosa, parent of two, 12 and 17-year-old. Well, a parent of three, 29-year-old as well, but two in school now. So when Tim says an armed officer in every school would make your kids safer, what comes to mind for you?
I get sad. Because I don't want my children going to school seeing armed officers. There has to be something better, something healthier for them, and it's not having an armed officer. I could see them reacting, like getting more intimidated, and seeing police as an answer. What does that tell the child? What would that tell my son or my boys when they're walking in, they see an armed officer?
I'm trying to get in Tim's head, or anybody else who is going to argue for this, and they might say, hey, you might go to a shopping mall. You might go somewhere where they've got security. And that doesn't make you feel bad. That makes you feel safer. And tell your kids that would make them feel that should make them feel safer. No?
Well, you see, school for me, school is like a second home. And so, my boys aren't gonna walk in home and they know that there's consequences to bad behaviors, but they know that they're not gonna be, abused or mentally abused. And so, school is a second home, and I just feel that school needs to be an environment that is warm, that is supportive, that is nourishing. And I just don't think that would contribute to that.
So Isabel's talking about the psychology of it. Eamon talked about the data of it. Angela, where are you on Tim's suggestion? He wants more officers back in schools.
Well, from lived experience, I would say no. Because I remember I graduated in 2012, and at that time there was officers, all around. Every time I walked in through those doors, it felt like if I was going back to court, which I've already had experience with, the family court system. So it's like going back to that same environment in some sense. So it is a psychological thing. Like I would like to see and feel warm when I go indoors, something that makes me happy, like colors, not an officer that will make me feel as I have something to fear in some sense. So I don't think that, in my opinion, no. I would believe that maybe having some trained professionals in the school that maybe don't have it like out in the open, concealed weapons, or just some training of some other kind where actual adults could come in and handle the situation without having to put an actual officer with a gun.
Well, let me grab a phone call from Gary in Brighton who wants to weigh in. Hi, Gary. Go ahead.
Yes, I taught in the city for 41 years. I grew up in the city, and I'm listening to everything people are saying, and unfortunately, these same things were being said years and years and years ago, and really nothing has changed all that much. As far as suspensions go, that's a tough call, because what if you have a kid that's in the classroom every day and not violent, but is disturbing the class every single day, and that prevents the other kids in the class from being able to learn? What do you do with that student?
Gary, I think that's part of where what's the name of the zone?
The help zone, and I think that it's a really good question, because we hear this all the time, right? Like that's sort of the thing that's held up is what about the other students when you have somebody disrupting learning?
Sure.
And definitely there needs to be something to address that behavior, but most of suspensions aren't for that, first of all. And we did a study a number of years ago when the district first changed its discipline policies, and suspensions went down pretty significant, like 30%. And we didn't see the impact on the academics of other students. We didn't see it negatively hurt kids because you weren't suspending people as much. I think that that's a little bit of a myth or a straw man sometimes. But I would say if that is a problem, then yeah, you gotta address it. But is addressing it getting rid of that kid and not letting them go to school, right? There's got to be some other solution here. So I think that that's
where the help zone comes in.
Yeah, the help zone comes in. I mean, and it's not just help zone. I don't think that's a cure-all. There could be a lot of other things, but you got to go, why is this kid acting out every day? Is there something else here that needs to be addressed? And you're not addressing that just by kicking the kid out of school. In fact, you're ignoring it and allowing it to fester. And I think that's the biggest point. Suspensions just don't work. We both agree, and I think everybody would agree, we don't want kids disrupting class. Suspensions just aren't going to fix that.
Gary, thank you. And I want to let John in Rochester, you got about 30 seconds to squeeze in some suggestions. Go ahead, John.
Okay. How about having parents share their parenting and teaching skills with one another on a very local basis, say a pot of six, three parents, three children, and take turns sort of babysitting and child teaching one another's children who are in the same grade, and shouldn't we let parents know who the nearest children are in the same grade with their own children?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting idea. Angela, Isabel are two involved parents here. I don't know about the specific idea here, but generally speaking, more parental involvement. What do you think here?
That's a great idea, great question, and I think it's doable. We're actually in BIPOC Peak. We're trying to we are empowering parents by education, and even here in this children's agenda, like joining and like being active. That would be a resource of information and support for parental support. And yes, having parents get together and share their own experiences and what works for them, what didn't work. Absolutely, and then having a safe space for children to actually talk as well. Like, what are their ideas, and how can we actually come together with a family-driven, youth-guided approach?
So this is only just one aspect, obviously, of what the Children's Agenda does. And as we reach the end of this hour, let me just tell you again, if you want to participate tonight, it's a teach-in. It's a Children's Agenda teach-in event, and it's on Zoom. You can participate on Zoom at 6:30. Everyone is invited. You can hear about the proposed RCSD budget that's coming up here, and we'll post a link to register on the episode page. They would love to see you there. Angela and Isabel show you what it's like when parents get involved at this level, and I really appreciate both of you being here, sharing your experiences. Good luck to you and your kids. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Eamon Scanlon, Director of Community Impact at the Children's Agenda. Whatever happens with this budget, will you come back and kind of fill in the community on what did not happen and where it goes next?
I would love to.
Thank you for being here. More connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.